We're here for a bonus episode of Big Sisters in STEM Season 2, and we're joined again by Esther, who kindly joined us in Season 2. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back.
And we're also joined by another special guest, Duncan Ivison.
Yeah, great to be here.
Welcome.
Thanks for the invitation.
I think today we wanted to kind of reflect, take this moment to look back on some of the big conversations which came up in Season 2, and that we want to just discuss and dig into, problem solve a bit together.
Yeah, and who better to talk to than the Vice-Chancellor of the university?
I'm known, usually Vice-Chancellors create problems, so I'm sure I can solve some problems today, yeah. Or at least that's the perception sometimes.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that's true. But it's wonderful to have you, and honestly, I think we should start where we usually do, which is just talking a little bit about you and your background. Could you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to HE, to higher education?
Well, I'm Canadian originally. I grew up in Montreal, Canada, which is in the French-speaking part of Canada. And I was in a sort of bilingual program as a kid. And it was a very intense political time in Quebec at that time. Quebec was seeking to separate from the rest of Canada. So it was a really kind of politically intense period. And I just got really interested in those questions and those debates. And, I wasn't really like a superstar in school or anything, but I did manage to get a place at the uni in Montreal. And I thought I was going to go to uni, McGill was the uni where I went to. And I thought I was going to go and become a lawyer, right? But literally, first week, second day of uni, I went to my very first class, and it was a class in philosophy. And I just literally fell in love with the subject. And the rest is history, as I say to my students. I mean, I literally just fell in love with the subject. Law school became a distant memory.
Yeah.
And I think it was being in that really multicultural, multilingual, intense sort of atmosphere. And Montreal's it's a bit like Manchester. It's a very funky city, lots going on. That's really what I think probably kicked off my interest in ideas and philosophy, and got really interested in moral and political ideas and debates about that. So yeah, that's probably where it started.
So that first lesson was a huge key influence.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think I'm being overly romantic. I literally remember sitting there in the lecture theater, and actually, subsequently, I found out this incredibly famous professor who was teaching, and the first thing we read was this wonderful text by Plato called The Apology. And it's where Socrates is making a case to the jury so they won't condemn him to death. And it's his attempt to persuade them why what he was doing in the city wasn't as dangerous as they thought it was. I was just like, whoa, I hadn't really experienced anything like this before, because you don't do philosophy in school, right? Or at least you don't in Quebec. So, yeah, I was just like, wow, this is really powerful stuff.
Defining moment for you.
Yeah, I didn't understand it, but it was still really interesting.
Yeah.
So something just clicked.
Sometimes those moments can be so powerful because I did something similar when I went to uni. It was a subject I had never done before. It was something that I hadn't been exposed to too much, only through little moments, little windows like that, where you get a little sight of a topic which you think, wait, this feels like a bigger thing. This feels like I'm taking the rock off something. And seeing
good way
what's
to put
underneath.
it. Yeah, really good way of putting it. Good metaphor.
Yeah, like I think sometimes those moments can be really powerful because it gives you this hint that there's lots of knowledge that is the context for everything else that you might be interested in. So is philosophy that kind of foundation for you? That
Yeah, it really
became
is. It
politics
really is. Yeah,
and education.
It really is. And one of the things that's amazed me, and again, it's probably my brain reconstructing things post hoc, whatever. But I'm amazed at how my subsequent studies in philosophy, and especially moral and political philosophy, have been incredibly useful in the role I'm in now, right? Because I am a kind of first principles person. I tend to come at issues or problems and say, okay, hang on, what is the underlying fundamental question here that we're trying to answer? And like a lot of people trained in philosophy, getting the question right is as important as thinking about the answer. If you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get an answer that is useful or powerful for the purposes probably that you're looking for. So that's been an incredibly powerful training for me. And also not being afraid of not knowing. I mean, a lot of philosophy is about disabusing yourself of knowledge, of realizing that you don't know what you think you know. I know that sounds weird, especially in a podcast focused on science and technology, engineering, mathematics. But a lot of philosophy is actually clearing away stuff that you thought you knew, but in fact you don't, because you haven't really thought hard enough about it. That's really important in a role like mine, because one thing I love about my job is I just learn new cool stuff, literally like every hour almost.
Daily.
Physics and astrophysics. I was a terrible mathematician in school. And in fact, I was sort of scared of mathematics. But I subsequently became incredibly interested in it in university. And then in the roles I've had teaching and working in universities, I've had a chance to sort of explore that. So yeah, I am that kind of person who finds the questions often more interesting than the answer. Answers are very important, don't get me wrong. But I think that's something.
You sound like a philosopher there.
Yeah. So that's something about it's probably just hardwired in my brain for some reason.
We've both said this at times, Alice and I, to each other on and off camera.
Yeah.
How surprised we've been, like how creative STEM is.
STEM is so creative. Like everyone we've had on has been like,
Massively.
I was going to do physics. Or art, or fashion, or something.
Exactly.
Or even like I write music and poetry in my spare time. Like they're not mutually exclusive.
No,
I think
massively.
we've been really surprised by that because we were ignorant to that before.
Exactly. When you said like every day brings kind of new revelations, new surprises, that's what our jobs felt like working on this project. And Esther, from a physics perspective, do you relate to that idea of liking the questions? Because we've done a bit of looking backwards on that topic before.
What you were saying about this whole idea of, in philosophy, wanting to look at what you don't know, and the whole point is not knowing most. I think in physics, that's kind of the same thing, and I think that's a big misconception you have, not you, but the general population has on physics, is that it's just about the answers, when really a lot of the best science we've done historically is from solidifying what we don't know and what we're not certain on. So maybe hundreds of people down the line, we will find an answer to something, and that answer will give us 20 new questions. And that's always the more exciting bit, is the new questions we can get, because we never want to be at that end point. And I think having that intersection between physics and STEM with humanities and especially philosophy, I think really improves the subject as a whole, because you do get a lot of people who go into science, who go into STEM with a really rigid thinking of, I'm going to figure out the answers to this, and that's going to be my job for the rest of my life, and I'm just going to be doing the numbers, and it's going to be so hard and fast, and it's just facts. And I think that's the antithesis of STEM as a whole. I think science is always viewed through the perspective of that human experience, and we can't detach it from it. And so I think it's really important that we really emphasize to students, especially, and younger people, that yes, you can go do science and you can go and look at the hard facts and the numbers, but it's important to also understand what that means in relation to people around you. So if you're doing something like physics, and maybe you're doing something in terms of energy, where are you getting those energy resources from? Who is that impacting? Is that impacting people in your life, or is it impacting a different group of people? Are you okay with who that's impacting and how you're doing that? And how can that reflect back on the science you're doing? Because a lot of the times, by trying to make sure the political and social questions you're answering, like how can I do this in the most ethical way, that can lead you to a more efficient form of science, because we learn to do sustainable green energy practices, and that's more efficient in the long run than just burning coal. So I think the two of them are so interlinked, and I think it's so important that people from philosophy, people from studies like yours, really speak on that experience and teach people who do STEM, and that people who do STEM listen, because there's so much more we can learn and put into what we do as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I learned, I was the first humanities, the job I had before this at Sydney in Australia was I was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research. This is a fancy way of saying I was responsible for helping sort of look after the research enterprise for the university. And Sydney, a bit like Manchester, actually bigger than Manchester in terms of student numbers and everything, but similar, comprehensive, but very, very strong in medical and health sciences. And I think I was the first person in that role who had not come from a science background. And there was a bit of anxiousness and nervousness about that. But one thing I loved about getting to know disciplines I didn't know much about, one thing I've really come to appreciate about the way that scientists and engineers and mathematicians think, is I love the way that in STEM you're always breaking the problem down. Like even the most seemingly kind of insane ambition, like building a quantum computer, right? You've got to bend the laws of nature to do that in all kinds of extraordinary ways. But the systematic way that, a physicist or an engineer comes at that problem, I just love. Because I'm not saying that humanities are non-systematic, but we tend to problematize everything and then work ourselves out of those problems. Whereas, I love the way that, when I talk to the physicists the theorists who are working in quantum theory, and then I talk to the engineers trying to build these computers, they just had this really systematic way of thinking about, okay, we're going to solve this problem, and then if we understand that, we can go here. If we get that, then we can go here. Ooh, but now we've run into this big problem. Okay, let's take a step back. And I've actually taken a lot from that subsequently in, my own way of having to approach problems in the university. So I think you're right. It's about how we sort of bring each other to the edge of our disciplines and learn, and then take that back into what we do the rest of the day and come back at the same time. So
I think at the heart of everything is that human interest, and it's like you were saying, Esther. It is actually so interesting. I feel like I'm taking a step back, and I'm like, that philosophical approach does just apply to everything. It's the undercurrent throughout. It kind of ties everything together, because it's not only like the human impact, but it's like acknowledging the communities you might not be familiar with or you didn't even think of before, and it's just so interesting.
It is a
I feel like I
foundation,
didn't
isn't it?
actually realize that before,
Yeah.
how foundational that is. You might feel like that in your own practice, but when you look at every sort of discipline, and we had Claire on, and a civil engineer, and she was just like, you cannot have science without that human interest.
I mean, I think Esther
Yeah.
put it really well, and it's actually a really deep philosophical question in itself, which is, I think you said, science is always, we see science through our human experience. We can't detach ourselves. But of course, there is a dream of science which says we do detach ourselves from human experience. We can kind of achieve this sort
big
of,
questions.
independent perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's that's inspired a lot of great science in our time. But like you, Esther, I think that's not the right ideal. I think we're inevitably looking at and asking questions through our experience. But that doesn't mean that we can only ask questions that are pertinent to our own experience, or only understand things that are pertinent to our own experience. But we can't avoid that as a starting point, right? We can't but ask a question from the perspective of the human sort of experience. Although, as I said, really interestingly, some people think we should try and step away from that. But I think what it means is then you've got to really reflect hard and challenge yourself, but also be challenged by others, and that's why diversity in not just in universities, not just in classrooms, not just in politics, but more generally, is so important, because you have to be challenged by the kind of, not just the intellectual presence of others, but the physical presence of others and the kind of moral presence of others to really challenge you. So I think you put your finger on, I think, a really powerful point about that relationship between humanities and STEM and what they have in common.
I think connecting to what both of you said, this whole idea, like the idea we get with physics, I think I understand when people have that perspective of that physics should be, or science as a whole should be, completely detached from like our human experiences, and we should try to achieve a very objective idea of it. But my only trepidation towards it is that I think we just aren't there yet as a society, as a community. We have so much history that weighs down all institutions, and especially science as a whole. But I think we can't think about, oh, let's just get there and completely detach it from everything, when it's still so deeply attached to so much history and a lot of oppression and a lot of suppression of different voices. And again, I think that's another barrier towards entry into the topic, because you have a lot of people who look at it through what we've built up to a very colonial lens. Science, the community of it as a whole, is very westernized. It's very dominated by European, specifically like English, French scientists, who obviously have contributed so much to the field, but it's completely overlooked a lot of massive contributors, especially like in terms of maths. The Middle East completely shaped how we think and see of it, but we don't really speak about that, especially under lower levels of education in like high school, secondary school, primary school, and still in university. So I think making sure we acknowledge these different voices and these different contributors and the diversity that is a part of the system and can continue to be I think does help us actually get to that point where we can start to remove that human aspect. I never actually want to remove the human aspect from science. But
Yeah, it's not so much removing. It's just
yeah.
it's that idea of impartiality or objectivity that
Yeah.
science
yeah,
aspires
definitely.
to. Yeah, which is
I
really
think
powerful.
we can move
idea.
towards that idea once we start actually acknowledging the different people who have been a part of it and could be a part of it, and we remove those barriers, stopping people from going into it. Because it's my least favorite thing to hear. Like, it always upsets me when I hear people in general say, "Oh, I could never do physics," or "I could never do maths. I'm just not built for it." And I
it's
think
so common. So
it's
many
really
people
common, isn't
discount
it?
Everyone in my
themselves
life.
from a subject very early.
especially when they prove in different ways how well tuned and well skilled they would be towards it. I've heard people who do biology and chemistry say they couldn't do physics, which, when it comes down to it, biology and chemistry is physics. Everything is, in the way that everything is maths, everything is physics. It's just the application of it. And
Spoken like a true physicist.
it's all physics, all your
Everything's philosophy, by the way. Everything's philosophy, by the way.
And we've spoken with multiple guests who've been talking about that whole conversation about what can we do as individuals and as a collective to support and build more intersectional communities, and that's within STEM and higher education more broadly as well. And it is a recurring topic. It comes up, I would say, almost every episode.
Every episode, yeah, multiple times.
So those concerns are very high on the list.
Aram spoke a lot about that, didn't she? As president of the 93% Club,
She did.
She takes part in the road shows that they really encourage people to even think about university as an option, let alone STEM.
Yes.
Because there is just such a huge disparity of people who just might not even be on your radar that university is something that you could do.
You're completely right, because that club, the 93% Club, that one of our guests was president of here at Manchester, they have kind of societies throughout the country, and it's specifically for state schoolers. The more those conversations happen, the more you realise people adapt in different ways because they feel like the path they're on isn't as well trodden. Maybe as...
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, one thing I've learned is, two things when it comes to the whole issue of access, which is something I'm quite passionate about. I mean, one is exemplars really matter. So, I mean, Esther, you really matter to the young people coming in behind you, and that's just something I've seen be such a powerful sort of force when you're trying to show people what's possible in their lives. I mean, I can get up and talk until I'm blue in the face, but the example of someone who's come from that community or come from that neighborhood or come from that town and done it is so powerful. And I think the second thing is, and we still struggle with this. I don't know what you guys think, but universities to me are they're just full of implicit knowledge, right? There's so much about university is implicit.
Don't even get me
And
started.
when you talk to young people who have not come from a background where university is something that's talked about, been experienced, there's no one in their immediate circle who's even maybe stepped foot on a campus. That's a huge issue. Like, even simple things like, what's a tutorial? Where do I go for lunch? What do you mean I can defer? What's a unit of study, or what's a credit?
In STEM, B-Eng and M-Eng, nobody knows what those
we,
are.
and
they get embarrassed asking, and it's like, you don't need to know this yet.
So universities are full, and this is not just a challenge for students. It's also a challenge for staff, right? Who are coming from, minority backgrounds or coming from non-white backgrounds. There's just all this implicit assumption about the way the place works, and you just assume to know that kind of thing. Like, of course, this is the way you're supposed to speak there, or this is the way you're supposed to behave there, and that can be so disempowering. So I'm always asking myself, like, are we making things explicit?
Yeah,
I almost
it's a good
felt I had to
question.
make a T-shirt once saying "Make it explicit." Like,
That sounds controversial.
I know. I thought it was a bit too edgy for that reason,
new
but
humour.
that was the theme. That was the theme. Like, we're
Picture
just
on the website.
yeah, exactly. Make it explicit. Yeah. That's my new slogan. Probably a dangerous one, but you know what I mean. Like, it's just we're really bad at that as an institution.
Something that's really simple as an example of that is in a lot of schools and a lot of homes, people are taught to be seen and not heard, for example, and it's quite an old-fashioned way of, like, children feeling like they should behave, because it's kind of like, be quiet, there's too many people in this classroom, for me to give you individual attention. You kind of constantly asking me questions or giving me bother. But that's very, very different in every different household, and often something that's found with students which have been kind of fortunate enough to go to a paid school, so they come through the public school system, is sometimes you can get to uni and you can be in a lecture, and lots of these kids are putting up their hand and offering their opinion very freely and with kind of confidence. And the kids which have until now been told to just be quiet are thinking, wait, is that right? How do they know all this stuff? But actually they're just confident enough to offer their opinion right off the bat. And that's part of learning, and the way when you go through uni, you kind of get better and better at that. And that's kind of that skill of like debate and kind of like putting across a point persuasively, the art of persuasion. But you aren't kind of built in with that. That's not a taught lesson. Nobody learns rhetoric at school. In the state school system anyway, on our curriculums. And it's kind of just a skill that some people come with that pack, like in their backpack, and some people just have to just copy what others are doing and think...
And that can define your whole experience. If you don't feel like you're able to be like taking part in discussions or putting your hand up or asking those questions that you might. I used to sit in class and be like, I'm not putting my hand up. It's not an option, because you're just used to being one of 30 kids.
Yeah.
Everyone's screaming, like someone's been sent to detention. Like it's like chaos.
And then if English is your second or third language, there's then already the sort of natural hesitation because you're not quite sure. I went to French school until grade 7 or 8, and so I'm pretty fluent in French. I mean, less fluent than I was, but pretty much bilingual. But even now, when I have to give a talk in French or I'm introducing people in French, I still pause and just I'm not the same as I am in English. So for our international students or for our students, our local students who come from multilingual backgrounds, that's another thing that can hold them back from engaging. As you said.
Well, that's the thing. There's any one of these examples can be one thing that would hold you back. And then some students have 5 of those things. So for them to get over 5 obstacles, that's 5 jumps. So it's kind of like, how are we going to make sure that these spaces feel inclusive for everybody, and everybody is encouraged to speak up and not fit a certain mold already? It's kind of like, come to uni and don't worry about the fact that you're not completely ready to hold debate with your lecturer yet. Like, that's fine. We're all here to learn, and we all start at different places.
That reminds me, actually, that conversation is commuter students, a lot of the time are home students, so they're commuting from Greater Manchester, maybe as far as Sheffield, I don't know. And it's like...
Alice being from Sheffield.
On top of my head, 50 minutes, Aram spoke a lot about time poverty, and for her, she had to consider, doing university, but it would be a lot of it would be kind of self-funded by various jobs, and therefore she had less time. She would be living at home during that time. So it's, how can you encourage these people to make that leap and be the first generation? And even though they might not have felt like at the start that was always an option, they're pursuing it. How can you make the commuter experience feel like like everyone else's? Because I think a lot of the time, I know there's been recently, there's been various initiatives put in place to kind of, and now there's a commuter student kind of centre and stuff, but it's like not scaring away people who are taking that step and taking that leap to participate in university and study, but like not giving them the same experience and the same quality of experience that everyone else gets.
I think, so interestingly, in Australia, where I was the last 20 years or so, 75% of students commute, right? So in Sydney or Melbourne, the vast majority of students commute. So our challenge there was, how do we get them engaged in uni life in a way that, the students who are living on campus, the smaller proportion living on campus are. So it's a sort of inverse of the problem that you're describing. But I think more and more students in the UK, certainly in England, are going to be commuting, because I think the cost of living is becoming really significant. I also think, for reasons that you touched on, as we hopefully encourage more diverse students, more first-gen students to come, they'll want to make choices that keep them closer to their families for various reasons. And, I've just seen some stats from Wonky, the think tank on higher ed, and I think it's something like 94% of students are working in one way or another right now. Some crazily high number. Don't quote me on that. I'll get the right figure. And so I think this is just a fact of life for unis. I do think physical space means a lot. I do think we have to make the campus more amenable to students who are coming in for the day, who might travel 2 hours or an hour by train or whatever, and are there for the day. So do we have the spaces? Are we giving them, and this is a challenge to the Students' Union, are we giving them the opportunities to join societies and clubs and sports teams that students who are on campus have, right? If societies meet at 7 at night or 9 at night or whatever, is that something that all our students can do? So I think the student unions have to think about that. And then access to facilities and laboratories and things like that. Are we thinking about not just the ideal, as it were, the ideal student, the student who's living on campus in residence, who's there for 3 years full time? Are we thinking about the part-time single mom or working student who's living, in Sheffield or Bolton or whatever and has limited time and also holding down a job? And I think there's a whole bunch of things we have to think through in that regard.
I suppose making Manchester a welcoming place where people from Manchester and Greater Manchester,
Exactly.
the Northwest,
So important.
feel like that's a supportive place for me.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
want me there. There's a community for me there.
Absolutely.
That's a natural choice.
Yeah.
Is a big part of it.
And I
as
don't think
well.
we're there yet. I think a lot of students still see the University of Manchester as, so you might want to, you probably have experience of this yourself. Like, is that my kind of place, right? Like, that's something I don't think we've quite.
Yeah, when you live around it already.
Yeah.
I think, because I'm from Bolton, so I was obviously very close to the university my entire life. And I had that experience, which most students do, where I wanted to move really far away from my family. I wanted to have something completely different.
Yeah.
Until I started getting closer to that age. And for various reasons in my life, I was like starting to realise I don't think that's possible for me. And I didn't know if Manchester University was an option either, because it's this very prestigious university and it is like cornered off in its own little place. And coming from a state school, again, having that experience where I've known a certain type of life and I've known a certain type of trajectory. Most of the people who left my high school, secondary school, they just went straight into work. And so that was the reality for most people around me, and that was the reality I thought I was going to do the same. And so then I luckily had a family friend who went to the university, and I was speaking to her about it, and then I got to do work experience at the university as well. And I think those experiences, being there and really feeling immersed and understanding what it would be like, made me feel more like I could actually see myself there. But again, I made that choice to move there and not commute, because I understood if I was commuting, it does add those extra obstacles. And I don't think it's completely a university issue. I think it's also something that the government as a whole needs to work on. Because especially in places like the north and the northwest, we don't have a great transport system.
No.
Greater Manchester is better than most of
Yeah,
Kew and Burnham. I do love the B network, but on a wider scale, it's not as
terrible,
efficient as
isn't
it
it?
should be.
Yeah.
And so it adds greater issues where the train from Bolton to Manchester is 15 minutes, but it can take me up to an hour or two to get from Bolton to Manchester. And that's time that could be spent studying, it's time that could be spent socialising, it's time that could be spent working. So it really makes it not as much of a reality for a lot of people. So I think part of the answer is just better public transport, but I understand you can't build us a new train station.
Of course, we have a mayor who's very passionate about public transportation, so we talked to him about that. But yeah, you're right. And it is, coming back to the UK, it is striking how bad the transport is east-west. I mean, north-south is probably a bit better, but yeah.
Yeah, because they go to London.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's in London.
There was one thing we wanted to admit to you today and potentially talk about, and that's that we'd read one of your papers
Oh dear. Very sorry about that.
about globalizing the curriculum.
Oh yeah.
It caught our eye because it seemed to speak a similar language to some of the topics that we've had on the podcast.
Yeah, it rang very true. It's a very interesting read.
Yeah, and it kind of seemed to us that it was read very academic, and it is using academic language, but it was actually a very I found it quite an accessible
Yeah.
paper in terms of putting into real terms what you think we could maybe change to make our curriculum less Western focused. And the voices that maybe aren't involved and should be involved, and what happens when we listen to them.
For me, it's about really challenging ourselves to step out of our received views. And the only way I think that can really happen is when, as I said, you're literally sitting in a room with someone or reading something that is challenging some of your fundamental preconceptions of the topic at hand. That comes from being with people with different experiences, people who don't have the same cultural background as you. What it does is clarify what we disagree about as much as clarifying what we might agree about. And that, to me, is what is so powerful about globalizing the curriculum, as I put it, or decolonizing the curriculum. You can choose your favorite phrase. It's actually helping us to clarify the things that matter. That's why it's so important to have different perspective, different viewpoints. It's not about being politically correct. It's not about making, I think people should be a bit uncomfortable at university. That might be controversial to say, but I don't think you go to uni just to feel good about your existing beliefs. You should be challenged about your beliefs, right? Whether that's in physics or chemistry or history or politics. But there are better and worse ways of doing that. So the paper was interesting. It was written for a conference where a bunch of political and moral philosophers were asked to reflect on, what it would mean to globalize or decolonize, or in this case, another bit of jargon, deparochialize your curriculum, or provincialize your curriculum. And so that was, my take was, well, it actually helps clarify what we really care about and what we really potentially not only agree about, but disagree about, rather than all this stuff about reaffirming our civilizational values or teaching us to be good citizens. It's actually about, you're being challenged to really think hard about your fundamental beliefs. And you only get that if you've got if you've got different voices around the table, different voices in the room.
Different values.
Yeah,
different
exactly.
experiences.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you just live in an echo chamber.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
Of beliefs. That's what university's so good for that anyway.
Yeah.
But having that diversity is obviously absolutely important.
And one thing, as you said, Esther, one thing that science students often don't appreciate, that science has real social and political consequences, right?
Yeah.
And it's important that as you've expressed it, that you think about that. You still need to know, if you're a civil engineer, we want bridges to still be built that don't fall down and all that stuff. But you should understand the human dimensions of what you're doing as well. Just as humanities students need to understand, there are certain things which, the laws of nature tell us that are important to sort of grapple with as well.
Yeah, we've had a guest before who's talked. V, do you remember when they would talk about essentially the people making decisions for kind of, I don't know, building a dam somewhere or kind of flood defences? They said that it was important that the people who are going to be affected by building all of that should be involved as well. And that shouldn't sound like a revolutionary statement, but when they said that, it became clear how little those people really are involved in those things which are going to shape their everyday life from there on. It can't always be the same people asking the questions, because if it's always the same people asking the questions, how do you know that they're always the right ones? So you kind of need that diversity in all different ways as well. Also kind of the very senior people, but also the people on the ground affected by whatever it is. Say it's a flood risk area in this example. But it's who's going to ask the questions, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. Because as much as we aspire to that kind of extraterrestrial view, there's so many ways in which we're prevented from getting there because of our particular bias, our particular history. And that's not a bad thing, right? We all come from somewhere. We all have beliefs as a result of the families and communities we grow up in and the things that influence us. But we need to be challenged about them if we're going to get to what ultimately we think the right answer is.
I think that's why it's so nice to have you here today to talk about that, because you're a very senior member of a very historic institution, and just talking to you about these really, really tangible things, like being able to talk to Esther about these really tangible issues. I think it's just nice. It's just nice to have a conversation about it. A lot of the time on the podcast, obviously, we're talking about things that we can all kind of like relate to. We all kind of understand to an extent, being a woman or being a minority. But I think it's really refreshing and it's really nice when the conversation goes a bit broader than that and it goes a bit wider than that.
And the interest you take in it.
And the interest, yeah.
We appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons we wanted you on here and appreciate having you here. I think it's weird. I didn't expect yourself and Esther to align quite as quickly with your physics and philosophy.
Oh, well,
There's a big intersection with
a big
physics and philosophy.
intersection,
It's offered as a dual honours at quite a lot of universities.
Is it?
Yeah, it was at the uni I went to.
It used to be here. The year I joined, it got rid of, which is why I don't do
really?
it. Yeah,
Oh, wow,
unfortunately.
I didn't know that. Okay, I thought it was offered here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes to my gripes of science being held at this different standard. And I feel like it comes from this belief, an honest and good belief, that we want science to be like meritocracy. I can never say that word. Well, we want it to just be about skill. And I think when we try to avoid and ignore the history that's surrounded it and the obstacles about accessibility, it actually prevents it from being something like that, where when you have the same people in the same room and we're all agreeing to the same point because we've all just been told the same thing, we get absolutely nowhere with science. For a long time, we didn't understand. Well, we did know. We knew that we orbit around the sun, but because of the presence of the church in science, we weren't allowed to state that, and people were persecuted for that idea because we all had this one prevailing voice. And I think that's still prevalent to this day, where we're not seeing enough different people entering this space, and so we're not getting enough different voices and enough different opinions, and it's hindering the science that we actually have. So I feel like we need to start seeing this idea of understanding that things like EDI actually help make our science more factual and more evidence-based rather than being this massive bias that it has. So I think we need more philosophy in science. We need more philosophy everywhere.
I think we need more philosophy in all subjects.
Everything, yeah.
I was very fortunate to do some philosophy. I started with Plato's Republic, was my uni entryway, and that was actually in a utopia module. And it started off kind of like, is it a utopia or a dystopia? And straight away, that was my
Good question.
hook.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. And the Republic's amazing, right? Because a bit like what Esther was saying, it's a book that has, unfortunately, we don't do much philosophy like that anymore. It's got everything, right? So Plato has a theory of knowledge. He has a theory of what exists in the world. He has a theory of politics. It's all there. And the book sort of unravels that, I think, in this really exciting way over through a dialogue, and then it becomes more of a tirade. But that's a big vision, right? And it's all there. I used to, with a colleague, sometimes we would teach first year political philosophy backwards, and we would start with the most recent contemporary book in political philosophy and end with Plato, just to give students a sense of that, sort of seeing the world in that kind of really comprehensive way, because it's not something we often do, given how specialized our kind of disciplines are.
It's exactly like Esther says, like, you love looking back in history. You've always said as well, it's not about the individual, it's about the team.
About the collective.
Yeah, you've always said that.
Physics is a team sport, that's what you said. That was
and
like
you're
such
kind
a good...
of building on what people before you have been working on.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of going backwards as well, because it's more realistic to real life. You don't know all of the context straight away, but once you find it, it means that you start to be able to kind of put things together yourself and think, oh my god, I didn't know that it all came from like this source. And the more people and the more philosophy you're exposed to from different parts of the world, the more history, the more we get that bigger picture informing what we're doing right now. And that's why what you're doing now really matters.
Yeah, I think if you look at any of our greatest scientific achievements in the modern day, or current massive science institutions, they are global institutions. They work across countries. You look at CERN, how many countries have partnerships with CERN?
Oh, yeah.
Our greatest telescopes are completely all over the world. Our science is only better when we work as a collaborative on a larger scale, which is globally. So it seems nonsensical to try restrict it or restrict our access to it. And you still see that happening, because even the more and more you widen participation, and you get students like me who I come from a state school, from a really low class background, and obviously I got to go to this amazing university, but it's about retention because at undergrad, there's far less students who are black, who are female, who are from state schools like I am, compared to when I was in college and in secondary school. And then the same goes on to the PhD level. And then the same goes on to the academics who work in the departments and then further on into the career. And you see that in another scale where we prioritize Western and more specifically British and American degrees, where you have really intelligent people from other parts of the country and their degrees are completely devalued. Like again, with the whole state stool experience, both my parents went to university, but they went to university before they immigrated to the UK. So their experience was completely different and it was devalued to a lot of people compared to the degrees that they got once they came here and the degree I'll be getting now. But that doesn't devalue the intelligence or intellect they have, and it's the same with many other people. So I think it's really important we allow ourselves to accept and highlight those voices and the contributions they can bring to our work.
You're so wise.
Completely agree.
Honestly, everything you say, I'm like, and you're first year.
So I think that is our final wise word.
Good way to end.
Yes.
Yeah, a brilliant way to end. Thank you both so much
No,
for
thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you.
It's been amazing. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.